That's one good. All right, so good afternoon. My name is Chris Burlingame, and we're going to be talking about college writing and sort of how to manage the anxiety that comes with being assigned a paper. A lot of times for newer students or for students who are in a class in a field where they're uncomfortable, there's sort of this overwhelming idea that comes from having to write a paper. Sometimes it's due to length, sometimes it's due to subject matter, but really writing a paper for any class is extremely manageable, and you can break all of the elements that go into writing a paper down into 3 simple pieces or 3 simple steps. So if you can look at it in, okay, I'm attacking this one element right now and I have to do steps 1, 2, and 3, that's a lot more manageable than saying I have to write 15 pages on neuroscience. You know what I mean? So we kind of tap into that element of the brain that allows us to manage tasks by putting them into 3s. Because if you think about any examples that you've been given, often they're given in 3s, and that's because our brain seems to manage that number for whatever reason that much more easily. So the power of 3 is that's where the name comes from, is the idea of breaking elements down into 3. And so why is writing so hard? The simple answer is really that it's not. It's that we allow ourselves to believe that it's more challenging than it needs to be. So it's really only as challenging as you let it be, that idea of writing a college paper. But really it comes down to taking control by planning ahead, by starting early, and by seeking the help that is available, especially on this campus. We have, I'm here every day from 8:30 to 5, except on Thursdays I'm actually here until 7. So there are resources here. If you feel uncomfortable, get help early. That helps manage some of that anxiety. But there is sort of, every part of writing can be broken down into these 3 elements, and we're going to take a look at each of them. Okay. So I always start a little bit out of order. How many of you have heard of what a thesis statement, or have used one before? What is it? Kind of define it for me.
It's just kind of like your main statement that addresses what you're going to talk about in your paper.
Right. It's where you lay out your central premise for your paper, or your main idea, right? I like to think of it as a roadmap for your paper. Basically, it's a single sentence that tells your reader what your topic is, what your stance is, and what method you're going to go about to prove that argument or to make that argument. So I always start with that thesis, and the thesis should appear as the last sentence of your introduction to make for a natural transition from your intro to the body of your paper, right? So like it says here, it's a single sentence that addresses the topic, defines the stance, and acknowledges the method. So simply put, the topic is what you're writing about. If you're writing about a particular disease like muscular dystrophy, that is your topic. Now, if you were writing an argumentative paper, you would say that you'd have to take some sort of stance. So what are you arguing for? If we're talking about muscular dystrophy, we may say that it is a debilitating disease, or it's a condition that has the potential to be destructive. And then what we'd want to say is, well, then how is it destructive, or how can I prove that it's destructive? And we kind of go through a thought process or a brainstorming process. So, sorry, let me go back to this and talk about how we break each of these down. So do either of you have a paper that's going to be due recently or in the near future?
Yeah, but mine's more of an opinion paper.
Okay, so well, you can still use a thesis statement even with an opinion, because it'll direct the kind of the flow or the thought process of the paper. So what's your topic?
Universities have obligations to ensure student safety. You're supposed to read through some of the universities and discuss
Keep going.
and give your opinion on what is most likely, which one is most likely to meet the university's obligations of keeping their campuses safe, and why.
Okay. So what we want to figure out first is, which side do you fall on the topic? Do you think it is the university's responsibility, or it's not?
Yes. I do.
Okay, so it is. So our topic is the role in student safety, and your stance for this particular paper will be that it's the university's responsibility. Now, why do you think that? Or how do you think that you can prove that the university is responsible for that?
Because the students are living here on campus.
Okay, so residential students. What else?
Because they do have a security office, so
Okay.
they must think it's important as well.
Okay, anything else you can think of?
No.
Okay. Kristen, do you have any ideas about what might fit into why a university should be responsible for safety?
Well, because if anything happens, like, to anyone on the campus, not just students and faculty, come back on them.
Okay, so they sort of have a legal duty to act, I would say. Yeah, there's definitely that sort of risk of
Just
legal
being safe
repercussions,
side.
like a lawsuit, coming back on them. So what I would do is, now that I have my topic clearly laid out, my stance, this is how I would brainstorm. I'd come up with a couple ideas of how I would want to prove my point. What I would do now is I would figure out, okay, what's my strongest idea? Which one do you think you could find the most research about, or that you think you could support the best in writing this paper?
Probably legal duty.
Okay, so I would say that legal duty earns the highest point total in terms of so that would be saved for last. I always try and build to my strongest point, and by brainstorming my thesis first, it makes it a lot easier to do the research, it makes it a lot easier to organize the paper, and it makes it a lot more manageable when I'm thinking about, okay, now how am I going to write my introduction? So I would say that probably the next strongest point would be the responsibility to residential students. Like, essentially the college is serving kind of that parental role, right? They're serving in what would often be called in loco parentis, or in the place of parents. And so they have that duty to protect those students who are on campus. And then I'd say that probably our weakest point is just saying, well, they have a security office, so it might as well do something, you know what I mean? So that's how I would set up my thesis. Now I would build a single sentence out of this that says, it is the university's responsibility to ensure student safety because they have a security office with that particular task. They have a responsibility to residential students to serve that protective or parental role, and they have a legal duty to act to ensure the safety of not just the students, but all who participate in the campus community. So what we've done is we've broken it down into these three elements as a brainstorming activity, but then we're able to transfer those elements into a single sentence. Okay? So that's what we want to do in creating the thesis. And like I said, I always develop my thesis first because it gives me an idea of where I'm going with my paper, in the same way that if your professor is reading it, or a peer is reading that same paper, they know by reading that one sentence exactly what approach you're going to take in making your argument or presenting your opinion. Now, it seems like we're kind of working back to the start here, and so that's what we're going to be talking about, is the introduction itself. Like I said, your thesis should be the final sentence of your introduction, but for the sake of getting readers hooked, we actually need to have a good introduction and something that leads us to that clear-cut thesis statement. So for me, the first thing that I would come up with once I have a solid thesis is, now that I know where I'm going, how can I get people interested in my particular angle that I'm taking with this paper that I'm writing? And that is to develop a hook. So you'll see the phrase there that it's more than just a nibble. If you go fishing, if you get a nibble, you can't actually reel in a nibble, right? You have to get a full-on, clamped-on bite in order for that hook to take its place in the fish's mouth and for you to be able to reel it in. So we want to find something that will interest your readers enough to get them from line 1 to the end of your first paragraph. So a couple options are to provide a personal anecdote. So you could give a story from your own life and say, when I was 10 years old, I climbed out of a swimming pool and I stepped on a bee. And so by giving that story, you can kind of start to build an argument about the idea of the danger of bee stings, or how we form our own opinions or ideas, and it doesn't necessarily go with that university safety thing, but you could make that work. You could say, because a bee sting is a traumatic experience. Any time where our security is compromised makes us feel uncomfortable with a particular element. So you can take something that's very personal and kind of develop it into whatever topic you're talking about. Another option is to say that, to provide a shocking statistic, something that really will grab your reader's attention, like 95% of students on this campus live on campus and would be at risk in the event of a disaster. Whether that's a mass shooting, whether that is an earthquake, a storm, flooding, whatever it may be, you can provide that statistic. You could also give a definition. What is safety? How do we define or qualify what safety means in writing this paper on university safety or campus safety? You could also provide a quote. The president said in his opening address, you are now a part of our family, and we will treat you students as if you were our own children. If you found a quote like that, whether it was the president of the college or whether it was somebody outside of the context of what you're writing about, you can use that quote as sort of, something to make the reader go, oh, that's kind of cool. I want to know where they're going with this, okay? And then the last option is to tell a story. So you could create a scenario. For example, a hunter comes onto campus, he's carrying a weapon, he's seen walking through campus, and there's mass panic, okay? So you use that as a scenario for why the college needs to be able to provide that sense of safety and security. Now the next step, and the hook is just kind of what gets your foot in the door, so to speak, but the more important part leading up to the thesis is the context. It's kind of that bridge between, just grabbing somebody's attention and then actually making them care. So some things that you'll do in this context section would be to provide background information. When did campus safety first start becoming an issue? What is the history of campus safety? Why is it relevant to the people reading this paper? The fact that they live on a college campus or that they teach on a college campus should make them concerned about, whether or not they're going to make it home to their kids at night. That's a very realistic and relevant point, okay? So then once you've established that kind of grounding in reality, then you can move on to providing your own personal argument or your own personal opinion and how you plan to support it with the thesis statement. So just like the thesis statement had those three elements, now we have three very clear-cut elements in our hook, our context, and our thesis to kind of round out what an introduction should do and what duties it should fulfill. Okay, so after you've moved on from your introduction, you come to the next point of the paper, the real meat and potatoes. You know what I mean? The real kind of heart of your paper is the body, right? Whether you're writing a 5-paragraph essay or a 50-paragraph essay, it's completely irrelevant because the body paragraphs themselves should follow a similar structure regardless of the length of the actual paper. So if you can approach writing your paper as, okay, I'm going to write one body paragraph at a time, that's a lot more manageable than saying, I've got 15 pages to write before tomorrow. One paragraph at a time, and when you're thinking about those paragraphs, what you want to use is this TEA model. Now, I can't take credit for this model. When I taught at a prep school outside of Tyrone, this is what I used when I was teaching ESL with their students. It was something that was simple, it was manageable, but I think that it's a broad enough topic that it allows itself to be applied outside the confines of just writing 5-paragraph essays. Now, what does each element stand for? T is your topic sentence. You want it to be clear and concise for each body paragraph. So what were our ideas again? They were security office. So if we were to write the first paragraph, the campus invests in a security office, so it should be serving its purpose. That would be in our topic sentence. We would make it direct, we'd make it to the point. Ironically, the best writing advice I ever received came from a history teacher, not from my English teacher, and he said all writing should be clear and concise, meaning you want to say exactly what you want to say in the fewest words possible. And that's what you're really trying to achieve with your topic sentence, is you want to make your point clear and then move on and provide evidence, which is what our E stands for. And with that evidence, this can be a direct quote, a word for word, example from an external source, or it can be a paraphrase, something where you try and take what that author was saying and kind of translate it into your own words, but still provide a citation so that your reader knows that you're not just making things up. You've actually drawn this from a reputable source, and it has helped inform your opinion. So that external source is extremely important. And then the most relevant element of writing a body paragraph is the last part, the A, the analysis. This is where you kind of tell your reader what it all means. And even with the analysis, I break that down even further so that it's also 3 elements, because so many students in the writing classes that I teach really struggle to understand. They can get the topic sentence down, no problem. They can go and find a quote or a paraphrase and put it down on paper, but then they don't really know where to go from there. How do they explain that? So in my writing class in the fall, I sort of developed this 3-step formula for providing analysis. Analysis in college is the real reason that you're writing. Your paper should be making an argument or proving a point. And this means that you are able to demonstrate your understanding or your full grasp of a particular topic. And that's why you're writing, because you're a member of an academic community and you're trying to make your case, or you're trying to make your contribution to that community. So the first step of analysis is a literal translation. Basically, whatever quote or paraphrase you've selected, kind of put it into your own words. Explain what it means so that it's clear to the reader you understand what it means, especially when you're using a direct quote. You want to explain, this author is demonstrating the idea of, make that clear. Now the next step is sort of expanding the scope of that analysis to the topic sentence of your paragraph. I call it topic threading. So basically you're explaining how the quote that you've selected demonstrates or illustrates the topic of that particular paragraph. Now, like I said, this level of analysis will work regardless of the type of paper you're writing. And then the most important type of analysis is the thesis tie-in. Basically, where you say, here is the big picture, here is what the evidence that I've chosen, here's how it fits into my overall theme or central premise of my paper. So you tie back to that central theme, and it will help unite the ideas that you're trying to present throughout the course of the entire paper. Make sense? Does anybody have any questions about kind of that analysis? Because like I said, it tends to be the part where students are great with the topic and the evidence, and then they're like, what do I do with it now that I have it down on paper? I don't know. So that's something that you would want to build those 3 steps with. All right, so this slide says that we're at the end, and that's not really the case. We're almost there. The final part of writing any paper is where I find students tend to struggle a great deal. They either struggle the most with writing the introduction, just getting started, or with wrapping the paper up and writing that conclusion. I can't tell you how many papers I read on a daily basis where it just stops at the last body paragraph and there's nothing after that. Now, in being a good writer and in being a good academic writer on the college level, ideally what you want to be able to do is show how you understood the concept by summarizing or restating your thesis and your main points. And then you also want to show your reader that you've given enough thought to the concepts that you can sort of pose a new question, or what I call going a step beyond. So our steps here in writing this conclusion are to help you really drive your argument home. And the first, like I said, is restate your thesis. So many students will copy and paste their thesis from their opening paragraph. That's not what you want to do. What you want to be able to demonstrate in your paper is that you understood the ideas well enough to put them in different words. To say, here's how I interpreted this idea at the beginning, and now that I've come to the end of this paper or the end of this discussion, this is how I view this same topic. Now, it should still have the same elements. It should still have the central topic of your paper. The stance should still be clear, and you should also make reference to the methodology or those steps that you use to prove that argument. Now, the next thing is you want to figure out what is the most important point of each of your body paragraphs. Each of those will be conveyed in your in your conclusion in a single sentence, one sentence apiece, for each of the main points. Now, obviously, if you're writing a paper that is, like a capstone where it's 20 plus pages, it's not going to be really practical to do that. What you'll want to do instead is think about what are the 3 or 4 main elements that I've decided or methodologies that I've decided upon, and how can I summarize the most important factor from each of those so that you're not writing, a 12-page conclusion, because that's not really practical. Now, in the same way that the A, or the analysis, is the hardest part for students in writing body paragraphs, this final step here, taking a step beyond, is the most difficult in writing the conclusion. So what this means in my mind is that you should have proven your point well enough throughout the course of your paper that it makes your readers sort of spark their idea to say, oh, so if this is true in this field, then how does it work in this setting? How can I take myself out of the frame of reference or out of the context of what's already been discussed and proven to me in this very convincing argument I've just finished reading, and how can I apply that to other things I know outside of this particular paper? So an example in talking about safety on the university level is that basically, if we ensure the safety of the students, faculty, and staff, we have effectively created a more conscientious and happy community. And this approach that we have applied in defining how we make our campuses safe, or why we make our campuses safe, could be applicable when applied to a larger community, like a city or a town or something along those lines. So basically, by fostering goodwill and the impression of safety, we feel safer, right? So if we can create that same sense of safety outside of the confines of a college campus, then ideally we'll have a happier and healthier community, right? So we kind of went one step past where we were talking about. Here we're talking specifically about a college campus, and in our conclusion, or in our taking a step beyond, we would want to think about how could we apply these same principles to a new or different topic. It doesn't necessarily have to be in terms of size differential, like small to big. It could be thinking about, if you're talking about a disease, if we have a particular treatment that works for like a neuromuscular disease, how can we apply that to another disease that has similar symptoms to combat those same symptoms, but maybe treat the disease itself differently? So that's one of the examples that I've actually worked with a student on their capstone paper. They were talking about different physical therapy interventions that you can use with students who are autistic. And so they talked about conditions that were similar to autism, maybe, whether it was traumatic brain injury, whether it was something else that limited motor skills or limited the ability to focus, and how you could use those same physical therapy interventions to help those same individuals, or those other individuals with that different condition, kind of rehabilitate faster or reacclimate to the culture that they're living in. And so that was their sort of bigger picture, or their step beyond. Now, like I said, writing is only as hard as we let it be, but knowing that we can simplify everything, and that we can break it down into more manageable chunks, more manageable pieces, and these components that we can handle on our own, it allows us to feel more comfortable in going forward with our writing, so that we never feel overwhelmed by a particular type of assignment. Now, if you still feel uncomfortable, there's no shame in asking for help. One of the things that I love about working on this campus that I didn't have at my own college was that we have so many different resources available in our Learning Commons. We have peer tutors, we have professional tutors, we have supplemental instruction, and on this college campus, there's really a push for not feeling ashamed of asking for help. It's honestly the brighter students, the more conscientious students, the more self-aware students who recognize, hey, this isn't my strongest subject, but there's somewhere I can get help. So please take advantage of those resources, and If it's writing a paper, obviously you'd want to see me. And like I said, my name is Chris Burlingame. I'm our writing consultant. I also work with study skills. And the two best ways to really get a hold of me are either through TutorTrack, which the link is up there, and then by emailing me directly. So if you can't get TutorTrack to work, don't hesitate to email me. If you see me sitting at my desk and I'm not working with another student, please, we try and be as accessible as possible. If there's nobody there, you're always welcome to come over and sit down and say, hey, do you have a few minutes? I want to talk about this history paper. I want to talk about this psych paper. Or, I want to talk about how I can best study for my chemistry class because it's really throwing me for a loop. We are here as professional tutors to serve you. You guys pay our salary. You are the ones who should be reaping the benefits of the investment that you're making in your education and in being on this campus. So please take full advantage of everything that's available to you. The thing that I tell students most frequently when I go out and visit classrooms is, at the Mount, there's really no excuse to fail, because if you don't like peer tutoring, we have professional tutors. If you don't like professional tutors, and you want a more group-oriented thing, you don't want the one-on-one, we do have supplemental instructions for many classes. We also offer group tutoring sessions through our study nights, through our academic workshops like this one. So there are all of these different resources, both print, both online, or even personal interaction with another human being. Heaven forbid that we talk to somebody, you know what I mean? But we have all of these resources available to you, and especially if you're taking a class where you're using a new citation style, or you're writing a paper that you've never written before, please come in and see me before you start. Like I said on that first slide, the best tool that you have at your disposal is your ability to plan ahead and to recognize, hey, I might struggle with this, and I'm going to come in and get help and sort of be more prepared. Because as you saw with that thesis statement, once we put that into place, you knew exactly where that paper would go, right? You could figure out, okay, if I want to break this down and start my research, and I want to look at similar colleges that have security departments. So you can go and just research that security. That's a lot more manageable than trying to do all those at once. So you can spend one day doing security, the next day looking at the in loco parentis concept of the university, and you can even look at the responsibility of residential students, or of having residential students. So each topic can be broken down into a different day's worth of research so that you never feel like you're doing too much or you have too many balls in the air at once. What sort of questions do you have? What sort of papers do you have coming up that you're not sure how to maybe approach, or what do you think?
I think I'm good.
You think you're good? You feel like that paper will be a little bit
Yeah.
easier to handle now?
Yeah.
How about you?
I have a research paper coming up in rhetoric, and it's about our favorite movie or our favorite author.
Mhm.
And the pointers definitely helped on how to tackle it, because sometimes I do struggle with tying it all together at the end, but after today I definitely feel better that.
What's your favorite movie or book, or which one do you think you're going to do it?
I think I'm going to do it on The Blind Side. That's
The
one
movie?
of my, yeah, the movie.
Okay.
That's one of my favorite movies, so.
That's good. So if you were
That
to-
I know I'll be able to find a lot of information, because it's a true story about Michael Orr, so.
So what elements would you think that you would want to address in kind of making a case for it being a worthwhile favorite movie?
Well, I've always enjoyed the true stories and stuff, and just about how one family, they never knew this kid, and they just automatically brought him in and helped him, and now he is in an NFL, and he's had such a successful life after struggling for so long, that it just kind of proves that the harder you work, the more benefits you'll reap.
Mm-hmm. And basically the idea that the harder you work, people recognize that hard work, and they want to help people who are willing to work hard. So I think that you could look at the idea of it being an inspirational story. You can look at it, the idea of being kind of a realization of the American dream, in the sense that the American dream as it used to be defined, if you're willing to work hard, you can achieve whatever you set your mind to. And that people still appreciate that American dream would be another element that you could talk about, in the way that the family saw him really struggling and saw he had this potential, and they invested their time, their effort, their money in him. So I think that might be a good approach. And I think also you could even look at how well the performances were put on to film there. The way the movie was shot, the way the actors performed, the fact that even the guy who plays Michael Orr was a relative unknown before he was cast in that film, and so he essentially is the Michael Orr of that movie. You know what I mean? He's somebody. He's in a very high-profile cast with Sandra Bullock and Tim McGraw and all the other characters or actors that are in that movie, and the director or the casting directors took a chance on him in the same way that that family took a chance. So there's a nice parallel between the actor in the movie and the real life story that he's portraying. So I think that that's another interesting element that might be worth bringing out in that type of paper. So what I find, like I said, is coming up with your thesis statement, kind of brainstorming those ideas, and then rank them. You know, this is going to be my strongest, so I'm going to save it for last. This is probably my weakest point of argument, so I'm going to lead with it. So that by building to that stronger idea, you also have to recognize that professors read so many papers in one, you know, sitting of grading, that you want to leave a lasting impression and a positive lasting impression with them, which is why you want to think about, I had a professor in college who always said, when you're writing, the first question that should come to your mind is, how do I get what I want? She's like, I know it sounds selfish, but really, how do I achieve my end goal? And if your end goal is getting a good grade, then you want to make a good impression on your professor and leave them with sort of that kind of like parting good shot or parting good image. And so that's why I always encourage students to build to their strongest point.